Here's the story of how folklore created ghosts, transforming ancient fears about death and the afterlife into the spectral beings that haunt our imagination today. From the earliest Mesopotamian tablets to modern horror films, ghost stories have evolved across cultures not as supernatural truth, but as humanity's most persistent form of storytelling. What we call ghosts today didn't emerge from thin air. They were crafted, shaped, and refined by thousands of years of human storytelling, with each culture adding its own fears, beliefs, and explanations for the mysteries of death. The ghost story is humanity's oldest form of psychological literature, and its origins reveal far more about the living than the dead. The word ghost itself tells this story. It comes from the Old English ghast, meaning breath, spirit, or soul. Linguists trace this back through Proto-Germanic to a root meaning fury or anger, connected to the Sanskrit word for rage. This linguistic evolution reveals something profound. Ghosts began not as gentle spirits, but as expressions of human anger and unresolved emotion. The connection between breath and spirit wasn't accidental. Early humans observed that when you exhale in cold weather, your breath becomes visible as white mist. This simple observation led to one of humanity's most enduring metaphors, that the soul is literally the breath of life, and when that breath leaves the body, it might linger in our world as a visible presence. The Latin spiritus and Greek pneuma both mean breath, and both came to represent the soul. This wasn't mystical revelation. It was practical observation transformed into spiritual belief. But the oldest ghost story we know comes from an unexpected source, a Babylonian clay tablet from around 1500 BCE, discovered by British Museum curator Irving Finkel. This 3,500-year-old artifact contains what may be the world's first ghost drawing, a bearded figure being led to the underworld on a rope by a woman. The tablet includes detailed instructions for exorcising this troublesome spirit, and the solution is remarkably practical: give the lonely ghost a romantic partner. The ritual text ends with an ominous warning that could have come from a modern horror film: do not look behind you. This ancient ghost story contains elements we recognize today: the restless dead, the need for proper burial rites, and the idea that ghosts can be managed through human intervention. The Babylonians weren't just telling spooky stories, they were creating a systematic approach to dealing with death anxiety. Mesopotamian ghost beliefs were surprisingly sophisticated. The dead were thought to exist in a shadowy underworld, but they could return if their living relatives failed to make proper offerings. These weren't random hauntings. They were failures of social obligation. Physical symptoms attributed to ghost encounters included headaches, eye problems, intestinal pain, shortness of breath, fever, and mental disorders. The ancient world was using ghost stories to explain what we now understand as grief, trauma, and psychosomatic illness. Some Assyrian kings even weaponized these beliefs, ordering the desecration of enemy graves to scatter bones and condemn rival spirits to perpetual unrest. This was ghost warfare, using supernatural beliefs as psychological weapons. It shows how deeply embedded these stories were in ancient political and social structures. As civilization spread, each culture adapted ghost folklore to its own needs. The Romans gave us some of the earliest recorded ghost stories. In the 1st century CE, Pliny the Younger documented a haunting in Athens: an old man with a long beard, rattling chains, terrorizing a house until someone properly buried his remains. This story established a template still used today: the ghost with unfinished business, seeking justice or proper burial. Roman playwright Plautus wrote Mostellaria around 200 BCE, often considered the first recorded haunted house story. These weren't just entertainment, they were social commentary, using supernatural elements to explore themes of justice, family obligation, and social order. The Celtic festival of Samhain, celebrated 2,000 years ago in Ireland, gave us perhaps the most influential ghost tradition in Western culture. The Celts believed that on Samhain, the barrier between our world and the spirit world became thin, allowing the dead to return. This wasn't random supernatural activity. It was a carefully structured belief system that helped communities process seasonal change, remember ancestors, and reinforce social bonds. When Christianity spread across Europe, it didn't eliminate these beliefs. It absorbed and transformed them. The Catholic Church established All Saints' Day on November 1st in the 9th century, directly overlaying the older Samhain traditions. This pattern of religious adaptation would repeat across cultures, with each new belief system incorporating rather than destroying existing ghost folklore. The medieval period saw ghost stories become more systematic and literary. The tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns originated in Ireland with the legend of Stingy Jack, a man who repeatedly trapped the devil and was condemned to wander the earth as a ghost for eternity. The devil gave Jack a burning coal in a carved turnip to light his way, and locals began carving scary faces into their own turnips to ward off evil spirits. When Irish immigrants came to America, they discovered pumpkins worked even better than turnips. The first documented poltergeist case was reported in Germany in 856 CE at a farmhouse where invisible forces threw stones and started fires. This introduced a new type of ghost story, not the spirit of a specific dead person, but unexplained destructive energy. Poltergeist literally means noisy ghost in German, and these stories often emerged around times of family stress or adolescent tension. Modern psychology recognizes many poltergeist reports as expressions of repressed psychological conflict. Victorian England transformed ghost stories from folklore into literature and commerce. The 1848 Fox sisters in New York launched the Spiritualist movement by claiming to communicate with a murdered man's spirit. Though they later confessed to fraud, their demonstration sparked a massive cultural phenomenon. The first spiritualist church was established in Yorkshire in 1853, and by the 1870s, spiritualism had become a global movement. Victorian spiritualism was particularly attractive to women, who were considered more spiritually sensitive than men. Female mediums like Florence Cook became celebrities, conducting seances where they allegedly materialized spirits for paying audiences. The Victorian era produced our classic ghost story authors, M.R. James, Sheridan Le Fanu, Henry James, who elevated ghost tales from folklore to sophisticated literature. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, represented the Victorian attempt to study ghosts scientifically. While they found no evidence of actual spirits, their investigations revealed the psychological and social functions of ghost beliefs. They documented how suggestion, expectation, and group psychology could create convincing supernatural experiences. But even as science advanced, ghost stories adapted rather than disappeared. Each culture developed its own spectral traditions. Japanese yurei became vengeful spirits with specific rules. They preferred to haunt at 2:00 a.m. when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and they often appeared as wronged women seeking justice. After the 2011 tsunami, Japanese ghost stories evolved to provide comfort rather than fear, helping communities process collective trauma. Chinese hungry ghosts represented neglected ancestors with needle-thin necks, starving because their living relatives failed to make proper offerings. African ancestral traditions featured spirits who provided guidance and protection rather than terror. Latin American folklore gave us La Llorona, the weeping woman who drowned her children and eternally searches for them, a cautionary tale about the consequences of abandoning family. Modern psychology explains why ghost beliefs persist despite scientific advancement. Professor Chris French notes that cognitive biases underlying paranormal beliefs help humans cope with uncertainty and mortality anxiety. Professor Richard Wiseman observes that humans are pattern-seeking creatures who want to imagine a world without permanent loss. Contemporary ghost stories serve the same psychological functions as ancient ones. Horror films like The Ring and The Grudge translate traditional Yuri stories for global audiences. Ghost tourism generates millions of dollars annually, with people paying over $250 per night to sleep in allegedly haunted locations. The National Retail Federation estimates Halloween-related sales will exceed $13 billion in 2025. Digital folklore has created new ghost traditions. Online creepypastas like Slender Man demonstrate how traditional ghost story structures adapt to new media. These aren't random scary stories. They follow the same psychological patterns as ancient folklore, using supernatural elements to explore contemporary anxieties about technology, social isolation, and loss of community. Irving Finkel, who discovered that ancient Babylonian ghost tablet, concluded that human beings as a whole species have always believed in ghosts from the very beginning. But this misses the deeper truth. Humans have always created ghost stories because we need them. They're not evidence of supernatural activity. They're evidence of human creativity and psychological need. Ghost stories function as social control, teaching moral lessons about proper behavior toward the dead and living. They provide comfort during grief, offering hope that death isn't final separation. They create community through shared storytelling, connecting generations through common narratives. Most importantly, they help humans process the ultimate mystery: what happens when we die? The evolution of ghost folklore reveals how human storytelling adapts to changing circumstances while preserving essential psychological functions. Ancient Mesopotamians used ghost stories to explain illness and enforce social obligations. Medieval Christians used them to reinforce religious doctrine. Victorians used them to explore psychological complexity. Modern cultures use them to process trauma and maintain community bonds. N. Fedeka Castor from Northeastern University notes that what a society calls a ghost is really reflective more of the society than it is necessarily the entity itself. This is the key insight. Ghost stories aren't about the supernatural. They're about us. They're humanity's most persistent form of psychological literature, using supernatural elements to explore very human concerns about death, justice, memory, and social responsibility. Studies suggest that ghost story consumption increased during the COVID pandemic, possibly because stress drives humans to seek ordering narratives during chaotic times. This pattern repeats throughout history. Ghost stories proliferate during social upheaval, helping communities process collective anxiety through familiar supernatural frameworks. The remarkable consistency of ghost beliefs across cultures and millennia isn't evidence of supernatural truth. It's evidence of shared human psychology. We all face the same fundamental mysteries: what happens after death, how to maintain connection with lost loved ones, and how to process grief and trauma. Ghost stories provide culturally specific answers to these universal questions. Understanding how folklore created ghosts doesn't diminish their power. It reveals their true significance. These stories represent humanity's most creative and persistent attempt to make meaning from mortality. Every ghost story, from ancient Babylonian tablets to modern horror films, continues the same essential human project: using imagination to transform fear into narrative, isolation into community, and mystery into meaning. The ghosts we've created through thousands of years of storytelling may not be real, but they've accomplished something remarkable. They've helped humanity cope with the reality of death, while celebrating the power of stories to transcend time, culture, and mortality itself. In creating ghosts, we've revealed the most supernatural thing of all, the human capacity to transform fear into art and mortality into immortal stories.